All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, I guess we'll go on to the next item, which is presentation by the city manager and receipt of the fiscal year 24-25 budget.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys making this work in the afternoon for you as well as our staff. It makes it a lot easier. The goal here is to do kind of a refresher on some things that you probably heard before in previous budget presentations, but also walk through some new data that we have and a little more explanation on the operational budget. I just have to start by noting that our finance department, especially Emily and Michelle, are the rock stars of this process. They spend a ton of time, data gathering, a ton of meetings with other departments to try to make it all work and make the numbers work. And today, finally, it's out there and we get to present it. So with that, we're gonna dig right in, and the agenda, we're gonna go through the trends and the community health pages of the budget. Then we'll go through what our process is, where we are in the roadmap of where we've been on budget. And then we'll dig right into the budget highlights and the fun detail. So if you're following along in the actual budget, I'll make sure I let you know when we're new to a new tab. This would be a new tab at the beginning, budget trends and community information. And then also you'll see at these pages, if you're trying to figure out where we are, it'll say down here, the page number and the section we're in. So we're gonna start with community health. We try to give some good indicators of what's going on in the city. This is a summary of our permits. It also includes right-of-way permits, so we tried to call out which were residential and which were commercial. Road permits are included in those, but it kind of gives you an idea, I think, of the investment that's happening in the community and the amount of permits that we're seeing from a trend perspective. We do have 2 years that are kind of outliers, and that was because of the hailstorm. If you remember, we had a lot of rough work after that, and that crossed over those 2 years, 20 and 21. When we look at community health, we want to give you an indicator of how our tax base percentage is changing. One of our goals is to diversify that tax base to make it not such a high percentage in one category over another. And so you'll see Gestamp is still a big percentage of our tax base, but just as an indicator, in 2018, they were close to 12% of our tax base. Some of that had to do with the personal property law changes, but also some of these others shifting with investment. We do have some shifting that you'll see. Beacon Lakes made some investments that pushed them up, which just pushed them over Michigan Packaging. It's not that there wasn't necessarily a de-investment in the ones that went down. Our community health trend here, this is about single family home starts. So you'll see here that we had 6 in 2023 home sales. You'll see the numbers are decreasing. This means our housing turnover is getting less and less. We'll talk a lot more about that later in the presentation. But you'll also see the median household sale price continues to go up, which I don't think is surprising to those of you that are watching the housing market right now. Our total residential homes percentage of tax base was 62.81% last year, and the frame of reference was 65.9. So this is new, that's not in your budget. We have been lucky enough to work with this Michigan State Housing Authority and the Michigan Municipal League on their housing portal. We got an early indicator of the housing portal this summer. We actually were a test case, and they gave us an opportunity to move around in it and to give feedback on what kind of data would be helpful for us. It was really great to see them putting together this information. The goal of the housing data portal, which you can all go on and visit and play around with, and I'll show you some of the charts we pulled, is that it gives you an opportunity to compare, and you can pick the communities you compare with. I'm gonna show you on ours, a lot of our charts. I compared us with the state, Ingham County, and Grand Ledge, just because Grand Ledge tends to be kind of an indicator for us of how they're performing compared to us, an outskirt of Ingham County, and very similar makeup as far as their structure. And so, but you could easily plug in a different city that you thought maybe, how are we comparing to that city? And I'll give you some examples of the data that we pulled. So when we look at population, so just as an indicator on here, Mason is always gonna be green. Not by my choice, it's just the data.
That's the way it should be,
How the data comes out.
green or red.
So blue is Am County, the state of Michigan is kind of this dark color, and then orange is Grand Ledge. So this, so you can go in and you go to the housing portal and you pull some different data, and you can have it just say Mason and just give us, but I think it's much more telling to see how we compare. And so you look here and we look at population trends, we can hover on one of these data points and see the exact number that they're reporting for that year. And so for us, I pulled out, in 2019 was our population peak and this trend, and then currently where we are. And you'll notice, you know, obviously we've had a population loss, and sometimes you look at that number and you say, okay, well, population loss, what does that mean? We're gonna give you a little more data about what that looks like. I also wanna be clear that it's hard to see on here, but it's by census tract. And so Mason data includes a little bit outside of the city of Mason. Just so you know, it's kind of squared off. It's not very far into the township, so I think it's still very representative of the city, but it gives you an idea. So the next slide talks about vacancy trends. So here we are in a situation where we have lost population, about 200 people from our peak to now, but we know 20 new home starts from that peak to now, and yet our vacancy rate is less. And so you'll look, and these are on the margins. You're looking at 48 vacant homes at our peak in 2019, 41 vacant homes in 2022. So thinking about that, we don't have vacancies. We have less vacancies than in 2019, but we have less population. So as we dig more into that data, we look at average household size, which again, this is not going to be surprising to you. But when you can't compare Mason to Lansing region area, and you look at average household size, our peak, we were at 2.32, and now at 22, we're at 2.18. And you think, oh, that's not that big of a difference, except it equals about 20 people or 200 people on average, which is about what we lost in population. So household size does have an impact, and I want you to think about your neighborhood, and when you look around at the houses around you, what were they peak in occupancy versus what they are today? And I know looking around my neighborhood and even the last 5 years, significant change. 4 or 5 person households down to 2. And it has an impact, and it has a broader impact because if you look at where we're gonna go with utilities and you start to see some of our challenges with utility rates, the issue is usage is down. Usage is down, of course, because of some efficiencies, but it's also down because we have less people in dense homes. Like we have, instead of 4 users, we have 2. Instead of 5 users, we have 2. Instead of 4 users, we have 1. And so as we dig into that data, it starts to show this trend that I don't think is unique to us. I think household size is changing all over. It's just a thing we have to adapt to, but it's not necessarily an indicator that we have the availability to build in population, because the houses are not vacant. And so trying to put those pieces together. So then when we look at cost of housing. So the indicator that MSHA uses is cost burden. And so cost burden is when 30% or more of your household income is spent on your housing costs. So green again is Mason. You'll see here, comparative renter cost burden for older adults is on this side. So these are seniors. We're comparing average renters to seniors. So you're giving an idea of, is cost and burden actually impacting our seniors more? And it's not really necessarily an indicator of that in this case. I'm sorry, I might have missed one, because this was the first one. I'm sorry, we skipped over it. This is in homeowners. So seniors that are homeowners, the next slide is renters. So you'll see here that when you look at our general households compared to our senior households, our seniors in houses are more cost burdened. So more of them are spending more than 30% of their income on that, close to 20%. Now, when you look at renters, Seniors are about the same as the average renter. So when we look at rental rate trends, you're seeing here the dramatic changes, I think, since 2012 to 2022, which is the span of this. And you look at average rents comparatively. And so when you start to see these data, you look at what our average rent is in Grand Ledge compared to Mason. And, but you look at 2012, and of course, we're seeing this constant trend up, then a dip, and then up. But it's really interesting to see how that trend compares to Lansing area, how it compares to who we consider our comp, Grand Ledge. And whether that is an indicator of our rents becoming more unaffordable. But then you look at this and you start to see, oh, did I go the wrong way? Then you start to see incomes. So you think, okay, well, is rent really more unaffordable for our residents? What you see here is a pretty big increase trend for Mason on incomes. So this is average income of a renter. And so you're seeing our renting costs are going up, but you're also seeing the incomes of our renters going up. And so you're seeing that trend, and it's interesting to look at Grand Ledge because they're following a very similar trend, but their rents are not necessarily following that trend. So when people say, hey, it's hard to rent a unit in Mason, there's some reality of somebody who could have rented before may not be able to now, based on the average rents. And there's also some reality of we have folks that are making more than they were that are coming into the market that maybe weren't here before. So that's all on housing data. And the reason that they pull that data together is it's really helpful for when we're talking to developers about what the gap is here. So some of the things that, when we're talking to developers, and we talked about it in the master plan, senior housing is a challenge. It's because of that cost burden issue, but it's also because we're not rotating households. Seniors don't have anywhere to age in place in Mason. There, I have a house, I have 3 bedrooms, and there's no place for me to stay here and be with my friends, be with my connections, be with my family. And so why would I sell my house? And so they become more cost burden though, because the costs of housing and all those things increase. And how do we keep them in the community? So really try and figure out how we fill those gaps. Dynamics are changing in housing. We're seeing different pushes on rents. We're seeing more generational changes on what they expect from housing. And so that's why pulling that data on a regular basis annually, I want to make sure we're doing that so we can kind of see how we're trending. But when you look at and dig into that data, you'll see that the trends are really on margin. I mean, you're talking about a 1% change, a 2% change. It looks a lot bigger on a big chart, but it still has an impact. So it's really digging into what does that mean from a value of rent? What does that mean from an actual number of population? Any questions on that stuff? Yeah.
Just one, could you go back
Yep. To what?
to, keep going, one more, oh, too fast, keep going, one more, keep going. Okay, you're saying that the average rental rate, or the state is saying the average rental rate is $1,050 a month in Mason.
Median rent.
That's about $13,000, more or less. And if you flip over to the next screen, it's $51,000, so $13,000 into $51,000 is less than 30%, or, no, that's about 19%, you're correct, I'm sorry. Keep going. I answered my own question.
I would really encourage,
It is less.
I would really encourage you to visit the site and go into the portal and play with it, because you can pull communities that you can, hey, how are they performing compared to us? There's also a lot of other data on there. There's a lot of data on equity, by race, by all of those things to see incomes and things like that. It's very interesting. Some of it is missing in Mason based on what's being tracked, but by census, but there's really good stuff. And I think it's really good to kind of give us a gut check of how are we trending compared to the state as a whole, but also how are we trending to communities that we see are comps of us. That if you were not living in Mason, you might choose this community. So how are they performing? So I want to dig into revenue trends. This is getting back to your binder on budget trends number 2, page number 2. So this gives you that breakdown between constitutional and statutory revenue sharing. Statutory revenue sharing, as you know, is always up for debate at budget time. There's definitely some interesting things being proposed in laws. There's a trust fund kind of thing being proposed to set up for revenue sharing. There's a lot of other avenues to try to secure that, and really it's all about trying to secure a more commitment to the statutory revenue sharing, because that's always up for debate when there's a tight state budget. And so we always are cautious about anything that's being proposed that says, oh, we're gonna share that revenue with you, because it ends up being a debated item at some time in the future, you know, and we always talk about these are promises that weren't necessarily kept when those changes were made to the law. And when we talk about the changes made to the law, we're talking about the Headley and Proposal A breakdown, which we've talked many times about. But when we look at, you know, Proposal A, I think this might be one of the first times that we're hitting those caps of 5%. I think 2 years in a row now, we've hit the caps of 5%. And it's an interesting dynamic because I traveled a couple months ago to another state where I was having a conversation, because these are the things I talk about with people on the meeting, about their tax structure. And they were noting that they didn't have property tax caps, and their property taxes increased by 20% in the last year. And they were talking about the fact that that really started to impact. It was a coastal community, and it was really driving people being able to stay or not. And it was the first time I kind of stepped back and said, oh, maybe property tax caps aren't horrible, even though they feel a struggle for government to maintain the costs that we need. But it really becomes a challenge when you live in a community where people want to stay for a long time, because we're not having the rotation. And so when we go back to that slide of housing sales, and you see that trend down of fewer and fewer sales a year, it starts to impact on capping, right? Because not as many properties are on capping, so we're not getting that catch up.
Why do you, why do you anticipate that, constitutional revenue sharing is gonna go down next year?
That was we pulled that, and that was actually the estimate that was given to us.
I mean,
And
it's only
I know-
$3,000, but it's.
I know when I was at MML, they were talking about the fact that they thought that sales tax was correcting from COVID, because a lot of things online were now being shifted and people weren't buying as much, and it was starting to correct more. And there was a big uptick during that time of sales. Does that seem in line with what you're hearing as well? That they thought that there would be more of an adjustment. I think it's actually more of an adjustment this current year. They're starting to see that trend. Because that's based on a formula. Versus
Yeah, I was just curious
yeah.
because it's generally trended up. I know 1920, but that was COVID time, so it's always gone up a little. I thought it was on to be down. Anyway, go ahead.
I had the same question, and she was like, yeah, this is what they're saying. This is what they're expecting. Okay, so this is where you're seeing another thing that I want to have Michelle talk a little bit about, because a little nuance here that I'm sure some people that are following tax capture would be like, wait, that doesn't seem right. And if you started looking at this chart, this last personal property doesn't seem right, at least in my mind, because we all know personal property is starting to phase out. So Michelle, can you talk a little bit about what that uptick is and why it's different than what the act?
Yep, so the biggest change between last year and this year, we saw $1 million go up in commercial, or not commercial, but utility personal property, which is consumers. So they gained $1 million, and then the other area was Meyer. They went up $2 million from the remodel. So that's not exempt because that's commercial personal property, so we can still get commercial personal property and utility personal. We just can't get the manufacturing personal property. So that's what's been phased out over the years, is the manufacturing personal property.
So you'll see that phasing out. When did it start? In 18?
In 2016 it started, yep, and then last year was the last year of the phase out, taken away a year every year.
So we, you know, Gaston continues to invest in manufacturing and things like that. And I know they're considering another expansion now, that's all stuff that would be exempt, even though it's new.
The personal side.
Personal
I mean,
property, yes,
real
if they
stuff.
don't do any investment in their property, it's just the personal. Whereas, you know, who thought, at least for me, it wasn't, I should have been more excited about Myers remodel, because it's like that isn't exempt, and that gives us a little more tax base on the personal property. And when you start to look at those numbers, you start to realize that some of our commercial property owners, when you look at TIF, when you look at abatements, and you look at all those kinds of things, some of those big projects, the ones that stand out the most in actual immediate investment back to the city are not Dart, but, what was the bank? True North, it's True North now, but it was CP when it was first put in, that had an immediate tax jump because they don't get incentives to anything. And so some of those smaller projects provide that jump sooner than some of the bigger projects. So this gives you that kind of separation between, CPI versus what we're actually getting in taxes. So you're seeing that we get, as the chart always does, it gets further and further away until there's some type of correction that we hope isn't coming. But that gives us that costs are still going up, but we aren't necessarily getting that property tax revenue. So this again gives that breakdown of state equalized versus taxable value. This comes down to that uncapping issue. And so, that state equalized valuation, just as a reference, is generally about 50% of the market value. And then the taxable value is what we're actually basing our tax capture on. And so when you look at these changes, you're seeing that trend of the SEB getting further and further away from that taxable value, which is a challenge. And the less houses you have on capping, we get further away from that correction. So we pulled a different example this year, a little bit larger investment in a home, and follow the capping, and you'll see that 2023, this 159 is what we're basing the taxable value. A few months later, it's actually 202 when you actually look at market value. And so that's the part where it's just really difficult to keep up with increasing costs for the city and how we're operating if we're not increasing that taxable value. It's a good problem to have, and that people want to stay in their homes for a long time and stay in Mason, but it does have some other consequences. So when I look at revenue trends, this gives you an idea of the breakdown of millage rates. We always like to give you kind of that history of what the changes have happened over this time period. We do want to point out that Mason uniquely has that 4 mil budgeted appropriation for streets. Because when you look at these other cities, they do not have that. So I know we've had a couple times where we're looking at like Grand Ledge, for example, we're like, we're so comparable to them. How are they operating on such a lower millage rate? We have similar size staff, we have similar size provided provided services. We don't have, one doesn't have an electric, one does. And so we really view them as incomparable, but they do not have money set aside for streets. And so that if we took away that, we would be pretty much in line with them or close to in line with them as far as their millage rate. And no one here from a staff perspective, I think, is arguing that we shouldn't have a set aside for streets. Everyone wants to know how we're doing it. It's a good indicator when people say, oh, well, Grand Ledge is this, why are you this? It's because we have dedicated money to that.
Well, and I mean, I'd also like to know how many miles of street they have that they have to maintain. Man, which is curious, that's be probably one of the more relevant things. Is there, I don't know if Grand Ledge is square miles bigger or smaller than Mason. I don't even know quite frankly, where the south boundary of Grand Ledge is. Is it M33? Or does it go south of there? Because then they've got 2 state highways that they're dealing with.
Right.
So,
No, that would be good. We'll pull those as comparables for future budgets to kind of give that. And that's one of the things, just so you know, I hope you make notes. We're going to be sending you something this week to say, while it's fresh in your mind, what is the data that was most helpful? What is the data that you felt like we didn't really need? And what would you like to see in a future budget? Or what would have given you more context? Because our goal is to constantly be improving this, and we don't want you to wait too long from the presentation to give us some of that feedback. So we talked about Ingham County taxes. There's a little more information on here that gives you, as of 2023, this is where we stood. It's the same, in your presentation as far as where we are from Ingham County to Washtenaw, but, or numbers of ranking, but this gives you a little more detail of, you know, Oakland is 101, Washtenaw is 102. You know, Michigan struggles. We are some of the higher tax, compared to median taxes over a tax year for individuals in a household. So, it's really difficult when you have a place like Ingham County where there's so many stretches of land that are not taxable. So residents not only are paying higher tax than other states, but on top of that, they're making up for it by those large stretches of land that are not paying taxes compared to other counties. And the reason that they pay more, just to be clear, is it's just tax structure. Other states approach taxing differently. And so there's ones that can do a lot of local taxing on sales and things like that, and Michigan just doesn't allow. This is our structure, but it's good to know that in context. So this gives you kind of a breakdown that I think sometimes people like to see as far as how our taxes that, you know, you pay your bill here, but where is the money really going? And it gives you an idea of how much we get versus how many of the other taxing authorities get that we distribute. Any questions on that background stuff yet? Okay, we're gonna dig into process and the roadmap of where we've come and where we're going forward. So you guys are gonna get very familiar with this graphic because we're gonna use it in our budget. We're gonna use it whenever we have a plan. You have already completed the CIP process. You've approved it. There is nothing that we weren't able to accomplish in the budget that you recommended in the CIP. And we have accounted for that in the first, second, and third year projections. Keeping in mind that second and third year will likely be adjusted, but the first year is right in line with what you approved for the CIP for this year. So the budget process is we have all these capital dreams, and then we have operating. How do they come together? And does it mean that we can't do all the capital that we thought we could? Or does it mean we need to adjust resources or things like that? So that process is about what we can afford to do. And so we're presenting a budget that allows us to do all the things that we proposed in the capital improvement plan, as well as an operational budget that you'll see does not add any staff. So we're really trying to hone in on that. And we're gonna talk a little bit about the trends we're gonna see in the next couple years. But right now, we're pretty happy with where we landed with the current year. So the budget process, just so it's a refresher, we start the CIP process first. But at the same time, when you guys are starting to review, when we're starting to put together the final touches of the CIP to go to the workshop, our staff is digging in on budget and trying to figure out how to make it work within that. And so we're right now presenting to you the budget. You will have an opportunity to give us anything if you see typos or things like that, so we can make it a more complete document. We want to hear those. And then the budget hearing will be at the May 6th meeting, and you can adopt it at the meeting, you can amend, you can defer, but you're required to adopt the budget no later than May 20th. May 20th does not mean you can't amend the budget later. It just means you have to have an adopted budget by that time. So what drives that? That's the required process within the charter. But then also what we have done, which many of you are familiar with, is we have added into the step a multi-year projection. It's really, I think, this budget year is a great example of why multi-year budget projections are really important. Because when we start building out the CIP and the trends in operations, we see that year 2 or 3 might have to shift a little bit, but we're comfortable with year 1, even though you're gonna see we have a higher fund balance than what is in our policy, because we know what's coming. We know what's coming in year 2 and 3. So multi-year projections give us a better understanding of the financial position we have. It also gives us time to have a strategic response, exactly what I was talking about. We feel good about this year, but we gotta start thinking about, do we need to shift some capital in the next year? Do we need to be looking for other revenue options? Or is it just that we tighten our belts and maybe move some stuff out that we weren't planning to? So then, really, your focus when it comes to this is the stewardship of public funds. I think this is one of the most important roles that the council plays. You're really driving the actions that we can take in the next year based on the budget that you approve. You wanna make sure, obviously, we're presenting you a budget that meets legal requirements, that our basic services are maintained. And then we also make sure that those funds are self-sufficient. We talked a lot about that with utility funds. They have to be self-sufficient, so we gotta be constantly managing that. And that the revenue is realistic and conservative. So, Michelle's revenue projections on constitutional revenue sharing, it's important that they're as realistic as possible so that we're planning accordingly. Appropriate reserves. So we really have a goal of trying to be between 20 and 35%. But this takes into account when we look at multi-year budget projections, is year 2 gonna be in that same range? Is year 3 gonna be in that same range? If not, are we holding some reserves because we know capital is coming that's gonna cost more? Any question on process? Okay, we're gonna go into budget highlights and fund detail. So the first thing we wanna talk about is the long-term debt. So we try to provide a summary, just so you know, this is the page that was updated. The update, for your reference, if you're curious, because I'm sure you might be looking, is the original document gave numbers as of today. When we realized that actually we referenced that they should be as of the June 30th audit date, so that they match up with the audit. So the document that you had before is a little bit lower, those numbers of debt, because we've made some payments since that submission. So for example, tasers have now closed out, we don't have a lease anymore. They expired in the fall, and so some of these others have had more payments in between. So I just want to give kind of I always like to talk about where we've been and where we're headed. So, we started this process and we really focused on trying to get a better handle on the budget. So before 2017-18, we didn't do multi-year. We weren't sure where we were as far as maintaining operations and what our standard level of service was. That was really the homework we had to do, was really getting to that standard level of service that our citizens expected. And then we also had to we were charged with taking on some challenges when it comes to strategies for unfunded liabilities. At that time, we were still offering pensions. We had to do a lot of work in contract negotiations to try to figure out a way that was slowly shifting us out of that. And I can tell you it took 2 contract negotiations to get where we needed to get. But because we started talking about it so early as a strategy, it was something that we knew we were preparing for and were able to have that discussion easier as we moved forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I back you up a
Yeah.
slide, the capital? I'm a little confused by what you said and just trying to figure out the reason for having to change some of the numbers, because like the capital lease, that should have been paid off last September, but it still shows an outstanding balance.
Because it's as of the audit. That's what the reference is, because we report as of the audit of last year.
Oh, okay, so this is as of last.
So the one that you
And
threw
then the
away,
last
The
paragraph is
one you
actually
threw
as of
away.
March 26th.
Current. The one you threw away was current as of this June, what we were predicting that.
Yeah. But then the last paragraph, clean water state revolving fund, that's actually as of
That's
March
new,
26th.
right.
Okay.
Correct.
but if you look at the other numbers, they're less in some place, so what
Yep,
you're
they are
following.
up, down.
Yeah. So, part of our goal was to really talk about, thinking about, in 1920, we didn't have a plan for the parks. We didn't have an idea of how we were gonna invest. We weren't doing any significant capital in the park. Then we had to hold off because of COVID. And we had to refine our strategy. And so at that time, we started to look at, actual design plans and prepping for these projects, designed for the library, for example, and really seeing what was feasible. And then you look at 2023, this is where we really focused on funding of the park improvements and the wastewater treatment plant. And then implementing that adoption strategy, which is the master plan of how do we shift into the future. And then 23-24, which is what we're in now, we're looking at the design of the DPW, the construction of the library, and the construction of the park. We have 2 park projects going on this, will be going on this spring, wastewater treatment plant. And then we adopted the master plan. We're starting in that master plan, noting priorities of asset management, and then the zoning rewrite. So when we look at 24-25, it's really a continuation of those construction projects. You look at the wastewater treatment plant, we're not planning to be done until 2025. DPW will be into 2025. Obviously, asset management plans will start to, and I just want to be clear, asset management plans are not an easy lift. If you do them correctly, and we really start to build the data and information, it takes a lot of time. And so we're really trying to take those off 1 a year and really focus on them as much as we can. And then obviously implementing zoning once it's adopted. So when we look at capital investments, we wanted to give an indicator here, which is different than we've done in the budget, of kind of how are we doing on capital? Because I think sometimes we sit back and we think, maybe not as much as getting done. I know our staff doesn't feel that way because they feel exhausted. But, you know, sometimes from the exterior, it can look like, oh, these things are just all getting done and we don't really hear about them and all that kind of stuff. And that's because it's really becoming a well-oiled machine as far as our average capital that we're investing. Obviously, we look at the outlier of the wastewater treatment plant and DPW, but when you look, we're really kind of around that close to 4 million that we're investing in capital, which is really good. And when you look at our comparable cities, they're not investing that kind of money in capital improvements. And so we're really making a lot of significant changes as we go along. This gives you a breakdown. We're gonna start doing this, and I think in future budgets, I'd like to give you kind of a trend line of the next 3 years, or even in the CIP, maybe that's a better way to articulate it, is how we're breaking down capital and what we're spending it on. Because I think we're really doing a good job of really investing in those essential services. Obviously, the sewer plant is an outlier right now, but as we move forward, regular investment in our utilities, our streets, and really showing that breakdown of where the money is going. So I think the story of this budget is that, to be honest, it's pretty boring. We've really kind of gotten on a good indicator of what it takes operationally. We know that we really don't want to grow staff right now because we really want to make sure we can continue to invest in the staff we have. And we'll talk about what we're doing with that and why that's really important, but that also takes money. And so we're really trying to make sure that we're balancing that. So we are proposing a reduction in part-time hours because of the fact that we're looking at contracting out our seasonal work for the first time this year. And the reason we're talking about doing that is because we've realized that our seasonal work, to be honest, has become too great of a liability. Kirk, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, in the last year, maybe last 2 years, how many worker comp claims have we had from seasonal work?
3 that I know for sure, but probably 1 or 2 more than that.
And we've had issues with the fact that, and when we talk about workers' comp claims, I want to be clear, you're talking about having now, what's different, I think, and Kirk, please correct me, is you have now students that are high school students working in parks, using equipment that maybe they're not as used to, maybe they haven't had exposure to. I know 2 of the claims I can think of last year, I would have never expected someone would have thought they could do, or would have contemplated that was something we needed to train them not to do, and yet they happen. And our seasonal work right now requires a ton of supervision. And it's just not cost effective for us right now. And the other challenge is because we're shifting to high school students, they're not really available that much. They have to wait, and then you can relate, John. And they go on vacations, which of course they should, and they do all those things, but it makes it really hard to have consistent staff. And by the time you train them, you're already in a situation where they're gone. And so it's just become really challenging. So what we would like to do this year, and I want to give Kirk a lot of credit for this, because he really evaluated the pros and cons of all the options and where we could maybe shift staff in an effective way. And we thought the most cost-effective way would be mowing of some of our areas. And so we actually are out to bid right now. It includes, you wanna give kind of a rundown of the highlights of the areas that it would shift to private?
Kind of all the parks, Pace Park, Rainer Park, Lee Austin, Leyland Park, City Hall, Fire Station, Library. There's 9 locations. That's pretty much what all the seasonal employees, would cover along with a full-time person overseeing.
So
Does that also include, the right of ways that we mow too, or?
No, not all of them.
Okay,
Just
we're gonna still do that.
Yep.
So just to be clear, what's shifting is we have some other requirements now of our DPW workers. We are doing lead line replacements. Some of those we're trying to do in-house to save some money and also handle with customers a little bit better. We learned from our contract services with the just indicating that, you know, residents get really touchy when you're on their property. And they want it to be handled a certain way. And when it's a contractor that's in and out, we end up dealing with all of the backlash of how that contractor acted on their property or whether they restored the property well enough or things like that. So I know Kirk would really like to take some of that back into house and be able to have our staff handle that more customer engagement that we need to treat our neighbors how we would want to be treated. And we feel like, lawn mowing in particular, you can set some pretty clear standards and maintain them and monitor them. And we have a lot of folks in this region that do this really well. And so we're gonna test it out. It's not necessarily a commitment forever, but we wanna see how that works and how the costs come in. So, go ahead.
Very quick question.
Yeah.
Does that also include cemetery mowing?
No, that's totally done.
You wanna talk about why you didn't wanna include that?
Well, because that's, very important place to the community and the, citizens and employees, so we felt that we wanted to still maintain that, to have a positive impact on the community. Instead of putting it on where we would have to oversee it, by answer, almost like lead service lines.
Right. So it was a very strategic look at where we thought we could have a comfort level of shifting some of these out, but have the lowest risk on customer impact. Really trying to figure out what that might look like. And so, I can tell you that even Kirk and I had some discussion about the RFP and what's the right amount of time, how often should things happen and all that kind of stuff. So I hope you will give us some grace this year as we figure that out. But if there's something that you're like, hey, this isn't getting maintained to the level I would expect it, we want to hear that because maybe they need to do a third edging that season, or they need to do something else that we want to make sure gets into the contract.
How's that impact, equipment maintenance?
Well, so
Cause we've got equipment to do it ourselves, and now we're not gonna be using that much equipment if somebody else is gonna be doing it, right?
that's true, but I want to say that we're going to be doing some, and you want to go ahead? Go ahead.
So that was a big thing, right, because the more vehicle pool, what's the impact gonna be on the more vehicle pool, and you're absolutely correct, with the mower not running, but we'll still be mowing. More time will be focused in the cemetery, so we had to increase a little bit with equipment hour rates within the cemetery. And then with the lead service lines coming up, that equipment will be replacing the mowing equipment. So it should balance out. But
And we're also, we're not getting rid of any equipment because we want to see how it goes. We want to do definitely an evaluation of if we're comfortable with what the service that we get. So from a full-time perspective, you're not going to see any changes. And I want to be transparent that our reduction of hours does not necessarily equal the cost of the mowing contract. But what we aren't really counting in that is the supervision that we have to do when pulling other staff to manage those teams. Also the rental of equipment, all that kind of stuff. So I think it gets pretty close. We're not sure. We'll know when the bid comes in, but this isn't a dollar for dollar. It's also about efficient use of time. So from a full-time perspective, we're proposing to remain at 49, and you can see that breakdown. But there's no changes in that from last year budget proposal. Union employees, those have all been negotiated wages. And We also have indicated, where we thought level increases have come in. And we can talk a little bit about that. I think we see these, 3% wage increases, but I feel like I'm seeing maybe a level increase by someone at least every other month of people that are working towards either in the police department or DPW, that are working towards improving themselves and up that, that qualified ladder that we keep talking about, with that level 3 being that position that, obviously, hopefully prepares them for management later on. So when we talk about, non-union employees, we're recommending a 5% increase, which is the wage increase that matches the inflation increase cap on property taxes. That's been our pretty standard recommendation across the years. With all the staffing changes, you can see those costs. And then the insurance impact of becoming a larger employer is something that we're watching. But I will say that, the 50 employee number, we're getting more and more information from other cities that it's not necessarily having a dramatic negative impact to them when they shift to that large employer. So we're not necessarily afraid of the 50 number. And just for those of you that are not familiar with this, right now, when we bid for insurance, I think we have one company that bids on us because we're a small employer. We don't have a lot of options. They bid on what they think, they can provide us for a reasonable amount. When you become a larger employer, it might give you more opportunities for more people to bid on you, but it's generally in the past cost you more. And what we're hearing from some of the other communities that are similar to our size, that when they shifted into like the 60 range, it wasn't that big of a jump. We have no, at this point, indicator that we're gonna go up to 50, but we just wanna give that frame of reference for you that we're starting to see some trend changes in the costs.
Can I ask, on the 5% wage increase for non-union, how do we justify 5% when the negotiated contracts are at 3%?
Because the average wage increase that the police officers got were 11 to 15. Because of the levels. So they had an ability to jump up because of their expertise. So they are seeing larger increases than that. That is their inflation increase. If they don't do anything, if they don't have any additional expertise, if they don't have any of those extra jumps, they get 3%. But if they're actually pursuing the trainings and getting better and getting more specialized, which we pay for everything if they want to do it, then they're actually getting other jumps.
Don't the levels apply to the non-union people too?
They do not.
They do not.
So I'm sorry, did you say that was the police?
Police, if you remember when we went through their contract,
Right,
I'm trying to find, do you remember what slide I had on the levels? It's further in. I have one that gives the breakdown of where we are on levels. So this gives you, in the union growth plan, how many are at 9? 9 are at qualified. Those are folks that I'm not doing anything else. This is my job. They may have just been hired because they're not eligible to jump a level until they get through probation. Then there's level 1, which is I'm trained, I'm equipped to do my full job, and I've taken probably some specialized training, especially in utilities or DPW. I have NISTIG training or things like that. Level 2 is I'm getting much more specialized. So in police, I'm the FTO trainer. I am the firearms trainer. Not only have I taken the classes, but I actually train people. And then level 3, I've actually invested in some leadership training and some other things. I'm actually supervising some people when needed, when people are gone. And so these are all levels that they can self-initiate to get bigger, get more increases. So when we went to the police contract, their increases, I think, range between 9 to 15%, most being in the 12% range based on that level breakdown.
so I understand that, but the 3% raises that are coming are for like DPW and laborers and those kinds of things, right?
You're getting 3% on wherever you are. So if you're a level 2, you're getting a 3% increase. It's basically a cost of living increase. That's what the union negotiated.
The cost of living, according to your chart.
You also-
5%.
You could make I would say, I would argue that especially in police, we are now at the highest accounts of our comparable cities. So we made a big jump, the last one that wasn't in line with cost of living.
But we did that, if I remember correctly, as a retainment tool.
No, we did it as a comp. A comp to other jurisdictions that were similar size to us. So we are now, if you look at our comp cities, I think we're second on most of our wages and one on level 3. So we are now at the high end of comps to be comparable to other cities. And obviously, we didn't have to go all the way up to there, but we want to retain people. Exactly what you were saying. But in addition, the levels give that range where someone can self-initiate that. So there's a scope of an entry-level officer to a level 3 that's pretty great.
Well, I really can't compare like a DPW worker to a cop.
They both have the same structures though. They both have comparable of, if you do this, and honestly, we also have implemented it for our part-time folks. They have a similar structure where they see the path of, if you want to become more specialized, I can give an example of somebody in our city clerk, it's administrative assistant, but if she becomes trained to be a deputy city clerk, which she has, now she moves up to a more specialized part-time person. So they are also outlined in levels.
So the only ones that don't though are the full-time.
Non-union. Yes,
And that 5%, that's cost of living.
Yep.
So there's also probably some merit raises in there.
Yep.
For certain people. Okay.
yeah.
So is the 3% that if there isn't much room for leadership or advancement, how does that work for them? Then are we training them? Does that training translate to other communities? Or is that just for here to get that
If you can,
3%?
hold that question, because I think I can discuss it in a future slide, and then if it doesn't address it, we'll come back to it. Because I think we're actually having a lot of success in that. And I think we can demonstrate that it's actually working quite well, that we're building those leaders. And what we're finding is that those are our best candidates for leadership roles.
But just before we leave this
Yeah.
slide, the key points here are, the 3% is negotiated, that's in the
Yes.
contract, it's already done.
Right,
The 5% is what you're recommending for the non-union full-time as a cost of living increase.
correct.
That, and your justification for the difference is that there's not the also benefit for the non-union full-time for the level increases and all that stuff.
Well, I also want to talk about the fact that when we negotiated the contracts for union employees, both contracts had large jumps into that contract.
But, and I,
But the reason I want to emphasize
understand.
that is because non-union did not take a raise during COVID. Did not, because they didn't have a negotiated contract. They did not take a raise during COVID.
Yep.
And when they did take a raise in the future, it was 1%, 2%, because it only matched inflation compared to the unions who had 3%, 2.5%. They didn't get that same protection. And so it's important to me that we advocate for our non-union employees, that they're getting that catch up when it's time, when it's available. And part of my justification for that is we're never gonna ask, at least I hope, I don't think we will, ever ask more than what the revenue increase is for property taxes. Because that's, that's a basis for us. Union contracts are negotiated 3 years out. They have no idea. So they're taking some risk, we're taking some risk on what that percentage should be. But it's important the reason I bring up the police is that when we compared to comps for them and we made that jump, we made a jump that they were getting increases when non-union was not getting increases, and we still made a jump of 11 to 15% per employee based on the new contract before they even got the 3% raise. There were 3% in the contract for the next 3 years. And so when you talk about that quantification, it impacts pensions, it impacts all of those things that some of the non-union employees do not get. Because they're not getting that big jump or increase that they were seeing in that year.
I just wanna,
Yeah.
I just wanna understand the logic of the difference, I don't see an issue.
Yeah, oh, wait.
Shift.
If it's on wages, this would be the time, but if it's on actual professional development, that's what I'm gonna talk about later.
I'm just trying to understand when you say in council, for example, that some staff leave because, there isn't anywhere else to go up here for management. Or they're being poached because, we are smaller
I don't know that I've said
an
that.
opportunity. Well, I thought that's why Boris had left the department. 'cause
I've
I'm
never
worried
said
about-
that.
So how does this incentivize me as a 3% union employee if there really isn't? How long do I do the 3% thing and keep leveling up my levels? Or is it automatically we're putting me in a management spot?
I'm
I'm gonna,
not following.
No. think of it this way. Everybody's got their base pay,
Yeah,
what they make. Everybody, doesn't matter if you're union, non-union, whatever.
yeah.
In this case, the union people have their base pay. They get raises two ways. They get a raise from a level increase and they get a raise negotiated at 3% per year, automatic. The level increase is basically voluntary, the 3% is automatic. So the level increase is where they're gaining skills and potential to increase their level of responsibility. It's through the level increase process where they get more training, and that's where the level 3 becomes basically, you're starting to think about getting management style type or leadership type training, whereas the earlier levels are just getting more proficient in your skills, whether it's the police or DPW. And so there's two different tracks going at the same time, and I get Deb, I'm just not trying to put words in your mouth, so tell me I'm wrong, but what Deb is trying to say is that first of all, 3% is 3%. We can't change it.
No.
It is what it is. And the reason it's 5% for the non-union is that they don't have the benefit of the levels.
Right.
And they also went for a couple of years and got no raises at all. And that's the rationale. So, just think of it as two different potential one potential raise track and one automatic raise track. The 3% is automatic, the levels are.
Well, you can look at,
Something you have to earn.
you can look at the 3% levels two different ways too, because as a non-union, you're gonna get 5% as a union employee. You have to do something to earn that extra 3%.
It's no, you don't, it's negotiated in the
No,
contract.
no, no, you got it,
Automatic 3%.
in order to get, they get a 3% raise every year,
Right.
granted. But if they wanna step up and get additional training and stuff, that's for the levels.
Then you work on levels.
Then you work on levels, but as a non-union, I don't have to do anything, I'm gonna get half again as much as an increase of 5%, and I didn't do anything.
Is
Except for
that
job.
how our non-union
Except
feel?
for job. I mean, no, I mean,
I think we go through this, it comes and goes. And what it all boils down to is this. If you're in a union, you've chosen to be in a union, and that's where your pay is going to be set. Nobody's forcing anybody to work for the city of Mason. So if you've chosen a job in a unionized position. And the non-union people, yeah, there's always gonna be this, but I bet if you went and looked at the past, the non-union was like this. It's up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. The last few years, it's been the last 2 or 3, you've tried to just match CPI. I remember years when we had low, I remember years when it was bigger. I remember years when it wasn't a 5% wage increase across the board. This person got this number, this person got this number, this person got this number. It was treated almost more as a merit raise with a little kicker for it, but,
There's nothing wrong with that either.
no, and I.
But I wanna be clear, we're doing that as well.
Yeah.
If you can demonstrate that from a comp perspective, your position is actually higher, and the challenge is a lot of our, especially our non-union leadership roles and middle management roles. When you provide comps where we can fall behind if we just stick with cost of living.
Yeah, you said that the 5% for the non-union is matching the state inflation rate multiplier using property tax calculation. So you're gonna say that our property tax is gonna go up 5% this year.
Well, that's what the state dictated inflation
Well,
is a cap.
we don't have to go to 5.
No, you have to follow
The taxable
that.
values went up 5%.
Yes, you have
We
to
can't
follow that.
change
The state
But we
dictates
don't
that.
have to raise the millage 5%.
We're not
That's
raising
right.
No,
the millage.
there
We're
is
not
no-
raising the millage. The
So-
millage stays the same.
This 5% wage increase is based on the CPI. What happens if the CPI next year is 3%?
Well, I can tell you what's happened. We've been 1%. We've been all of these things.
Well, is it always gonna match the CPI?
No.
No, but I can tell you that in the past, I mean, it didn't match the CPI when we got no raises because it was COVID and we didn't know where we were gonna head, so we didn't make any wages
Mhm.
increases for non-union. But all the contracts had been negotiated, We couldn't open them to say no
No, I'm
raises.
not talking about the contract.
No, but I'm saying that's the difference between the non-union and the union
Yeah,
is
I
that there are
understand
times that the union takes the hit first.
So let's just say next year the CPI is 4%, they're gonna get a 4% raise?
It will be depending on the budget. I mean, this isn't a number that we just pull out. We look at what we can afford based on our non-union positions. And where we are seeing, the value of those positions compared to what we're seeing, and we are falling behind on the non-union positions. Leadership positions in local government are becoming harder and harder to fill. It's a lot of demands on a position that's not keeping up with the private sector. And we will never keep up with the private sector, so we have to get competitive on other things, which I'll talk about in a future slide, of we've taken a holistic approach. We are never gonna win out on wage alone. Even with these increases, we are not winning out on wage. But we have to figure out other ways to make it a competitive place to work.
I understand, and it should be. But on the other hand,
Are you saying the
homeowners are struggling with 5%.
So you're suggesting we cut the millage? Because
No,
millage
I
isn't
didn't, I
changing.
didn't say cut the millage, we're
But the
right
mill-
where we are, but we don't.
But that's all we can do, Jerry. The tax value goes up 5%,
We don't
and the
dictate
millage stays
that.
the same, then tax revenue goes up 5%.
But we don't have, there's no law saying we have to raise the millage to match.
There
The
isn't,
millage doesn't raise.
the rate, millage is not increasing.
The millage number's exactly the same.
But you were talking about cutting the millage.
No, I never mentioned that at all.
No, you would have, if you were saying, I think, if I can translate, I think what's happening is you're saying, if you want to decrease what homeowners are paying, then we would have to lower our millage
Yeah,
rate.
that's the only way
That's
to
the
do
only
that.
way.
Yes, I understand that. Or not increase.
We're
We're
not
not
I'm
increasing
not
it.
saying we are,
So I'm confused.
but I'm saying you have automatic raises built in, basically.
I
For
have
the union.
raised for this year,
For the
For
union,
the water, the sewer. and
Oh,
property
for-
tax.
for rate increases?
Yeah.
Well, but just to be clear, the
But
property
I'm
taxes are not
saying that
dictated by
that's
us.
wrong either. I'm not
Right,
saying,
but the property taxes, we don't have control over.
what I'm saying is, the average homeowner sitting in his house and he gets his water bill or his millage rate or his property tax rate, that goes up 5% every year, or has. They don't care about anything. They care about the money coming out of their pocket going into the city. That's what they
The
care
only
about.
way you can address that is to decrease the millage rate. That's the only way you can address that as a city council member,
we
if
could,
that is the concern.
we could decrease the millage rate 5% and it'd be a wash.
But if we reduce the costs to the city, we reduce the cost to the
Oh, yeah.
citizen.
So if you, so
Where-
you're suggesting non-union employees get 3% raises, so that's 2% back on the non-union employees, which is probably, 25% of our wages. And in the cities,
But there's
actually,
other
you
ways
need,
to do it,
because
too.
labor is not our single biggest expense. Most
No, you
businesses
put
it
here
is.
with all the staffing, the non-union.
It's only $95,000.
Well, the non-union is 57,000,
Yeah.
so you're not even talking about a mil, or half a mil, a quarter of a mil, not even.
Okay, well, let's just set this aside till we get it further on down the road, figure out how we can cut costs.
Which cost do you wanna cut?
Well, we don't want to get started on that, Deb's in the middle of the presentation.
All right, well, we won't do it, talk about today. But now's the time, if you wanna convince her to do it, she would do it and it's a lot cleaner, but so, we can talk to some extent about those kinds of ideas, but we probably should get going on it so we get to the levels thing and get a full picture of the
Yeah.
labor side of it.
Sounds good. Okay, so I always want to give a heads up on where we are with post-employment benefits and pension benefits. And as you guys are aware, we've made some significant progress on this. Retiree healthcare is no longer offered to new hires. It hasn't been for a while. Pensions are no longer offered to new hires, so we're getting control of those costs. You're starting to see our percentages increase. What you'll see in these jumps, what you'll see in the pension is actuarials are not necessarily our friends all the time. And so whatever they decide is the new lifespan or the valuation of how long people are gonna live or what the costs are gonna be, those numbers jump, even though our contribution is not changing. And so you're starting to see that. I can tell you, we're gonna do some work, I think this year, Michelle and I were talking about, and really setting some targets, because it's not necessarily, in my opinion, a target of having 100% is not necessarily the best goal. Is it 85, is it 90%, to allow for some fluctuation in market, but that we're staying on top of it and are able to adjust. But we don't wanna put all of this money in here knowing that, with some guys or with something that's gonna adjust it completely, fairly quickly, especially as we start to have a more controlled group. So this gives you an idea of where we are with contribution eligible employees. We have 40 active, 40 retirees. And as we've had quite a few hires in the last year, and none of those are in our pension plan. Detail by fund. So I do not have page numbers on this because I'm gonna jump around a little bit. I'm gonna reference the highlights, but then if you want the detail, it's gonna be in the tab where the actual fund is. And so feel free to kind of flip between the two, and if you have questions, let me know.
Hey, Deb.
Yeah.
Should I have personnel staffing questions? Should I wait till after or was? this-
They're gonna come in the general fund, because that's where the majority of our cost is, in the general fund. So when we dig into the general fund, this gives you kind of an overview of what we're looking at. We talk about property tax revenue coming in, but then we also talk about what our mill value is. And for those of you that pay attention to the details, which I know there's some in here, the mill value may be different depending on what we're explaining to you, because on parks, not all the capture is in them, correct? So it's just a different mill value, so it starts to get confusing, but it's based on that capture what the mill value is. So then we also see here the Constitution and statutory state revenue sharing, which would go into the general fund. And then this is what our anticipated fund balance is, but when we look into future years, which I indicated in the highlights, I don't have it written down. Do you have what we are at for the next year? I know I have it in there.
Year two,
Mhm.
I think year three was the 16%. Year two was 30-ish.
But what's important is we run those numbers to kind of give us an indicator, but they're not necessarily, we generally see year three looking a little rough. Always, just as an indicator, because we don't know what grants we're gonna get, we don't know what that revenue looks like, and we're really conservative with that. But we paid close attention to year two, you guys finding that?
Yeah, page 11 of the highlights.
We don't have 26, 27, but 25, 26.
So it's 26, yeah.
I thought I put it in the narrative.
And then I think
I
year
did.
three was about 16.
No, 24, 25, or 25, 26, if you look in the narrative, it's 26 estimated percent. And so that's the year we're hitting that fund balance threshold that we wanna be in. And that's what we're looking at, is because there's a larger impact in year two, because of the capital we're anticipating. That's why we're comfortable with a little bit higher fund balance for this year, to plan for that accordingly. Does that make sense? Not seeing any nodding, but okay, we'll go with it. Okay, so this gives you the breakdown between the two, remaining unrestricted fund balance. But then when we get into the general fund expenditure trends, I wanted to talk a lot about personnel costs, which gets to some of the conversations we're having. We participate in a wage study with MML, and we're constantly evaluating where we are on comps with employees and salaries and wages. And as I mentioned before, and I feel strongly about, Mason is never gonna win out on the salary race. We're just not. And so we have to, and we're not when we look at our comps. But we're gonna have to find ways to get competitive with some other items. And some of those have been a ton of support that you guys have provided us. And I just wanna give you this comprehensive look, because it really comes out when we start to talk to employees about what's important to them. So the retention fund, you guys established that a while ago, it's in the budget. That really is about honoring employees when they're going through something. And so everything from last week, we had an employee that has a new baby. We had an employee that lost their father. Those are things that before we couldn't really recognize without passing a hat. And so that fund allows us to send something on behalf of the city, allows us to connect with them during that time, and really let them know that we understand that those are important milestones for them. We have paid parental leave, which we were one of the, I think, maybe first of 10 cities doing this. We did this right away. And we do a 6-3-3 program, which means we pay for the first 6 weeks. If they want to give another 3 weeks of their own time, then we will match that. And I can't tell you how happy I am to see that we see this used over and over again. In fact, our first employee to use it was a male, and our last employee to use it was a male. And both indicated that when they talked, before they talked to their spouses, that they had no intention of staying home that long. And then when they talked to their spouses, they're like, I was told I need to stay home that long. And so I think it really, but what's important about this is we don't want, our first user was an officer, we don't want him coming back tired, exhausted in a transition. We want to honor that time and really give that benefit to our employees so that they can transition easier. We expanded bereavement leave, mainly because the numbers that most government provide for bereavement leave is a bit of a joke. We increased up to 10 that's for a spouse, a child, or a member of your household. Can you imagine that most cities give 5 days if you lost your spouse? And really thinking about that. And so we really wanted to balance our values. Volunteer leave is 8 hours of leave that is for city employees to either volunteer in Mason Public Schools or for a nonprofit in Mason, so they can give back directly. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important when I give you some of the feedback from the state interview results. Holiday time, we go to minimum staffing in between Christmas and New Year's. So the reason this is important is I remember very clearly when we started this, that we talked about whole, one city, whole person values. These are our internal goals and values that we have. And we sat around, and I remember sitting in a leadership team meeting, I think at least a few of you will remember that. And I said, who's covering for Christmas? And everyone's like, well, I don't wanna work. I'm gonna be with my kids. And it really started to become, oh my gosh, the only people that are gonna have to work between Christmas and New Year's are those with the lowest seniority and those with the youngest kids. And so that doesn't match our values. And so we really shifted. And I know myself and some of our department heads really take on any calls or inquiries during that time. I'm not aware of any issue that we've had by taking that time off. And I think it's one of our most valued benefits that our employees appreciate. Free rental of City Hall, they don't get to rent it to bump somebody, but if it's rented on Saturday, they can come in and rent it on a Sunday, because we don't rent both days. And they're responsible for cleanup and putting it back, and it gives them an opportunity to provide something for their family, and they're responsible. No additional cost to us, but it gives them a benefit. So we're really trying to find creative ways, low cost ways, where we can be competitive in different ways. Tuition reimbursement, we really talk about tuition reimbursement and about encouraging people to grow, the levels programs and things like that. I want to be clear that all of these things were before COVID. Those were all things that we were already working on to be competitive. And it really put us in a good spot during COVID because we already had work from home policies and some other things that made it easy to make that transition. So we know personnel costs are increasing. Go ahead.
Going against what I've always talked about, I'd like to see the bereavement pay raised, increased.
To 10.
10 wouldn't be a bad idea.
Well, 10, it is at 10 for
No.
immediate.
10 paid, and then 3. Or 9 paid, and then 3. Instead of 633, 633, 933, or 1033, something like that.
That was parental leave. That
That's
wasn't-
parental leave.
No, I'm sorry, parental leave, not bereavement.
So what are you proposing?
Increasing the parental leave
To, how,
to like 9 weeks.
It is-
3 and 3.
it is 9 weeks total that the city pays for. The
But the-
employee only
This
contributes,
would be 12.
the employee only contributes 3.
I know, but this would be 12. 9, 3, 3.
15.
So you're saying longer than the 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure there are some people, and we would appreciate that. But I do feel like part of the balance, and I can tell you parental leave, one of the reasons we're so flexible on how people come back. And can they come back part-time? Can they do some other things to spread out their time? Because we are still only 49 employees. So filling gaps and all those kinds of things. So it's a constant balance. I'm not opposed to what you're saying, but it's just a constant balance of how we continue to operate and have that time off and what does it look
I
like?
just remember back when I had my kids, I got 0.
Yeah,
And my wife got 3 weeks. So. that-
yeah,
that didn't work.
I'm proud of the parental leave that we're doing, and I agree that it can always be better. But I think it is having a big impact. It's helping people make that transition better.
We have to provide so much time for parental leave, but we don't have to pay for it all.
No, 12 weeks is what you have to provide.
We don't have to pay for it all.
We do not have to pay
We
for
don't
any
have
of
to pay
it.
for any of it. We don't
No.
want. So we're paying for 3/4 of the
Yes.
12 weeks
Yes,
that we're giving, and 12 weeks is about a quarter of a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
personnel costs, as we talked about, so what we did, we knew that personnel challenges were something we were really concerned about coming out of COVID. Because we hadn't been doing a lot of our gatherings, we hadn't really known where people were, and to be honest, people were frustrated during COVID. And so we implemented stay interviews. There are other cities doing stay interviews now, but I feel confident we were one of the first in local government to do stay interviews, because I've presented on this at least 5 or 6 times. And so it's not uncommon in private industry, but it is more unusual in government. So we started doing stay interviews, about 50 hours a year that we spend on stay interviews, more than that, definitely, because there's some employees that want more than an hour. Our average job satisfaction in the year 22-23 was a 7. The first question we asked them is from a 1 to 10, how are you feeling about your job? And they give a ranking, and that gives you an idea of where we are. This gives you some of the activities we do to really try to make sure that our employees are connected. I reference this because I'm gonna talk about it in a little bit, because one of the feedback from the stay interviews is how we connect with the community. And things like escorting sports teams and things like that came up in stay interviews is really important. And so those are small things, low cost, that really can have an impact. And so sometimes it's easy to sit in my seat or in your seat and say, well, that's ridiculous that the city does that. But if it's something that leads to an employee feeling more connected to the community and that they're really having an impact when maybe their job doesn't give them that exposure, I'm all for it, especially if it's low cost and ways for us to do it. So I want to talk about the results of the stay interview, because it was a lot of effort, and we went through 1 year and we actually provided these results to all of our staff. And I think they were pretty much on point with what they thought. I want to get back to the beginning one. Sorry, I don't know why that flipped. So what we learned was that employees that were most happy, what they appreciated. And the reason that data is important is because when we go into interviews, we start changing our questions. Because we know the people that are gonna be most happy here are gonna really think these things are important to a job. If they come in and say, I just wanna make a lot of money and I wanna see the growth, we're not gonna be competitive with that person. They're probably not gonna stay there very long. So we really try to look at different things. So overwhelmingly, people love the people they work with. They're like family. They really like their departments. They feel respected. They like the flexibility of the workplace. We're really push on that. If you need to go pick up your kid, if you need some flexibility coming in late starts are really challenging for parents, and we try to be as flexible as we can on that. Over and over again, we hear previous employers didn't let them do anything but punch a clock and leave, and we really don't want to be doing that. We want to be focused on those other commitments. Proximity to their family, friends, and schools. We hear that over and over again. The people that are most happy are the people that my kid goes to school at Mason and I'm really close if I need to pick up. Or my family lives here, so I know I can check on this person, or I'm connected. And so that's why we look at things like residency bonuses and things like that, because we know the happiest people are the people that are ingrained in the community. Focus on the entire benefit package. When they come in and they ask about time off, parental leave, things like that, if they're worried about more than just their wage, that's a good sign for us that they really are in the right spot. When they want to be in a size organization like us, and this is something that I'm learning more and more about. This size, I think, is a really special size of community and organization, because you have the ability to have an impact. You can see your work, you can have a direct connection, but the other part of that is you have to wear a lot more hats than you do in a bigger community. And so you have to be comfortable with both. You have to be comfortable with, hey, I'm actually seeing my work have an impact, and I can see this neighborhood, or I can see this street improving. I'm seeing this thing replaced that I really had a good part in. But also, oh my gosh, I had to wear 20 hats during that project to get it done. And you gotta find the person that's okay with both of those. it made a difference if their supervisor was connected, cared about them, gave them feedback. We heard that over and over again. They wanted supervisors that gave them feedback. And so that's the part when we start looking into things of what can we do that's low cost that really has an impact.
Back, before you switch slides. The title on the employees that were most happy, appreciated.
Yeah.
What percentage of your stay interviews would you put those most happy in their position? What percentage?
So from my perspective, the most happy were 7 and above. So the people that came in and said 7, 8, 9,
That's half.
yeah.
Half.
No, I would say those that ranked 7, 8, and 9 were over.
I understand that.
No, I know what you're trying to get as a percentage.
I'm trying to get a percentage of the employees.
But 7 was the average.
No, sevens is just rating whether or not they're happy.
7
That's
was,
what she's talking about.
What I'm saying is, if you had 10 employees that you categorized as happy,
I think we're out of 10, I would say about 8 out of 10.
okay, that's all.
And honestly,
So but, then
that was just
you're
one
going
question.
down to 5 and 6 then, because
No.
half the people approximately have to be over 7 and have to be below it, because that's the average.
No, the question above was, how are you satisfied with your current job? Your current job. And then there's a later question about the people that were most happy in the organization. That ranking was higher. If you were happy with the organization but not happy, you might be a 7
So
or
with
6.
this says average job satisfaction, what one are you talking about? What
So
number,
people
what
that-
ranking are we on?
So this is most appreciated, people that were most happy, they were happy with the organization.
Out of
So,
the upper half. These do
Okay.
half.
does that make sense?
Well,
So-
no,
so
because
the
you
first-
related it at first to the 7, which
Yeah.
is job satisfaction, which I would relate to most happy. To me, they're the same thing.
Yeah,
So,
but they're different questions, I'm certain.
okay,
The one question is about, are you happy with your current job? Or what you're doing?
okay,
And then there's the,
overall
okay,
job satisfaction.
yes, overall. And so I would say we're about 8 out of 10. But I can tell you what it hones in is where are you at in your life? I can tell you, we heard that over and over again.
So 8 out of 10, you think are very happy with their job.
Happy with the organization. You're CT.
Let's use the words you use. You
Yeah.
use average job
That is a
satisfaction.
different question
Okay,
than this
what is
slide.
this
That's this
question?
side. You stepped over that side.
What is this question about?
So this is about, are you happy with the organization? Most
Not your
happy
job.
here.
The organization.
Okay,
Yes, so the first question was about, are you happy with what you're doing? Like the activities
job
you're doing, the
satisfaction.
tasks, all those things. And this is more about, are you happy with the environment? Your supervisor, your benefits, your things that are broader than just your job. Does that make sense?
well, I'm still kind of curious how 80% can be. happy
Because
with-
I'm not happy with my supervisor. I'm not happy with my peer. I'm not happy that I have to mow the lawn all day. But I understand that from a benefit perspective, I'm happy with the organization structure. I'm happy with those types of things. And I can tell you the things that came out that were the negatives on the others, you'll see the recommended actions that help address some of those items. So it's not that, what we learned was that the benefit package was good. I honestly thought coming into it, everyone was gonna say, we're not paid enough, we don't have the right benefits. That's not what we heard. Probably 2 out of 10 had an issue with salary. Overwhelmingly, that was not the concern.
And that would fall in,
Yeah.
you're talking about here, organizational
Yes,
happiness versus, do I like doing my job every day, which really it doesn't have as much to do with your compensation and your benefits.
and it's also, does my job, I might have a job, but over here, maybe I don't have as much flexibility. If I'm a police officer, I have to be here for certain hours. I can't go home and pick up my kids. I can't, so some of it is job specific as well.
Okay.
So these were overall suggested improvements. Overwhelmingly, people wanted more ways to connect with the community. They wanted more ways to show their impact and that they could use their community service time. All right, jump for some reason. Better communication with employees, more opportunities for feedback on bigger picture items, making sure that all departments were included in those. Better wraparound services that were available to citizens, not just police to give out, but other people to give out, because a lot of people interact with our citizens. Better understanding of benefit and contract discussions. That came out quite a bit, is that we were doing these stay interviews right after contract negotiations, and there was a lot of confusion about how those happen, and so talking through that. Regular reviews and feedback from supervisor. We did not have a good system in place before these day interviews of regular check-ins. We did with leadership team, but not with other staff. More consistent and onboarding processes. Sometimes people felt that they had a lack of support and were just thrown into their job. Compensation and benefit improvements were things that were mentioned, and I'll talk about what those recommendations were. Incentivizing the additional responsibility to live within the city. We heard the people that live here, it's hard to live and work in the same place. And so those were things that were definitely recommendations that came out of that. So what were the results that we actually put into action to try to address that? Levels. When we talked all this stuff about levels, that was what we heard in the state interviews.
You jumped again.
We heard that there's no place for me to grow unless I'm a manager. And so the levels provided an opportunity for someone that wanted to invest in themselves and for somebody who wanted to stand apart. You know, I'm sitting here and I want to go to classes and I want to do trainings and things like that, but why would I do that? There's no benefit for me and I'm not being prepared for the next position. Sergeant shift changes. We heard from our officers that they wanted more sergeant coverage on the weekends. So we changed that shift and we were able to demonstrate that all but one officer requested that more supervision on the weekends. Residency bonus, that was something that was contract negotiated. Both unions agreed, or all three unions agreed, and agreed that that came out of their staff, especially the ones that live in the city. Recruitment bonus. So this was something that we talked a lot about in the state interviews. Our employees are our best recruiters. We have right now an officer that's going through background right now that was a direct recruitment from an officer. So the way that works is they get, if that person is selected through the candidate process, they get a payment, and then if they make it through their first year, they get an additional payment. So the goal is to try to get them invested in that employee moving forward. They can't be part of any process, they can't be part of any training, but their goal is to advocate for that person and recruit them. Part-time benefit increases, we really tried to match our part-time folks with prorated holiday time, prorated sick time, because we have amazing part-time staff that have just chosen to not be full-time, and they save us on benefits in other areas, so we want to honor them in matching that prorated benefits in other times. In-service programming is really driven by our employees. Getting their feedback, that was one of the things that came out of the interview. You'll see at the top, this was a program by one of our staff people that I think was one of our best, which was a team building exercise that they brought in their husband to put on for our team. And they had to build roller coasters and work together and try to figure out how to build something as a team of different departments. The police department recommended all of our staff being trained on CPR and first aid. And so that was a training that we did to improve that. And so the goal here is to really have it be employee driven so that they're getting a value out of those in services as well. More opportunities for impact to the community. We really have started to try to figure out how we can do part of our in-services, having some community service or other areas where we can do community service. For example, we have taken on responding to the Santa letters. And so we work with one of the nonprofits to do that. And I can tell you, at least in City Hall, we all argue about who gets to do it when and making sure we all get some time, because if you're reading letters from kids that have real needs, which are pretty challenging to read at times, it puts things in perspective for all of us. And so those are the types of things that are low cost, but it gives us a connection to the community. 90-day check-ins. All of our staff should be doing 90-day check-ins, giving their folks feedback one-on-one and giving them some opportunity to ask questions about how they can grow and their development. So this is what I was talking about, better marketing of our positions. If you look a couple years ago before our state interviews, you'll see different language in our postings and different questions that we ask in the interview process. When we talk about fit for Mason, we're talking about somebody who wants to have an impact, wants to have meaning in their job, wants to connect with people, and it's not just all about the wage. And if it is, then we're probably not going to satisfy your growth here. And so we really try to be focused on that. So we know that personnel costs are huge. And we know they're only increasing for us to be competitive because it's getting more and more. So we're trying to position ourselves as a place where we're flexible, we give you good feedback. If you wanna grow, you have an opportunity to educate, to take more trainings, get more certifications, be specialized in your area, and really have an impact. But if you want us to be competitive with Board of Water and Light or Lansing, we're probably not gonna get there. And so that's what we're competing with. And there are gonna be folks of our employees that's what they want. And that's okay, but we're probably never gonna meet that. So we're really trying to do a holistic approach. So I didn't wanna just talk about wages. I wanna talk about it as a holistic program because it's not just that. But we can't get too far behind either.
Rita, did that answer your questions from earlier?
No,
I think now's the time to ask.
Okay.
isn't it?
I was just, really great summary. It's just over the last few years, especially since the pandemic and the lockdown, you know, we've been talking about staffing challenges, exhaustion, and we've been at the same level. And then, you know, when we're making city clerk, also HR director. Now we've got staff service coordinator, where we used to have 12 in police, now we're looking at 14 for the next few years. Which I assume is staff service coordinator position, that's a whole other, but. I'm just.
Where are you looking?
It's not 14, it's 13. I believe.
My question more generally, do you see a time where we will be going over 50 employees soon? I'm just concerned because I know I'm always advocating for more staff for community development. And it looks like the trends are giving us opportunity to get creative, to maybe make revenue or incentivize permits, or I don't know, just because housing and all the other trends. But are we planning on staying at no more than 50 employees for the next 3 years?
I can tell you where I'm at, and I feel pretty strongly about this, is that we have to present a compensation package that's at the value of the employees that we attract. And already we're falling a little bit behind on salary. And I do not want to spread that thinner with more people and not keep the people that we have by investing in them. And so it's a strategic thing, and it's one of those things that, you know, the people in the back of the room and Michelle, we talk about there are limits. If we were doing, I mean, we have a lot of type A leaders in this room who have big goals. And a lot of our one-on-ones are what's realistic capacity. And of course, we would love to be doing more. But we're also a small community. We're not gonna be able to do it all, and we have to prioritize. But the CIP, the 3-year budgeting, helps us do that. Because we can look at it and say, okay, from a capacity perspective, can we really do all this? I can tell you where I think our frustration, my frustration is that I think sometimes council doesn't understand those capacity restrictions. And that when we look at a year, we can't do everything July 1. We don't have the capacity. So we have to spread out our capital. We have to wait till spring to do some things. We have to wait till spring to do some things to see, hey, this is a lower priority thing. If all the other things come in higher, we gotta wait to see where that lands, because maybe we can't do it this year. We're constantly doing that. And I think some of the hard work we've done with CIP and budget give the expectation to council that July 1, you're gonna get all this done, and that's just not, we don't have the staff to do it. And so, I mean, I think if you said today, add 10 more staff, sure, we could probably get more done. I don't think you could afford that in a long trend. I don't think you could afford that in 3 years, because we don't know what's gonna be happening with, you know, where housing prices are gonna go and all those kind of things, so I would be nervous about that. That's why we're trying to get creative on, can we contract some things? Can we relieve some staff services by contracting mowing? Can we relieve some community development services by contracting some of the zoning and stuff like that? Where can we do that where we can stop it if we need to? It's really trying to be strategic, because when you bring on another person, it's really hard when times are tough to say, we're gonna get rid of somebody. And we would wanna try to make it work. So it's a strategy. I don't know that there's not gonna be a time when we need to increase, but I think our goal here is to try to keep around this 50 range. For a size our community, I think that's reasonable. Of course, we could always use more hands on deck.
How many, you already talked about Grand Ledge, how many employees do they have?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can find out.
Curiosity question.
But Deb, your goal is not a total employee count. And that's not guiding you every day when you come into work.
No,
What's guiding you every day is getting the work done within the budget we have, and the fact of the matter is, if you take into account next year, we will be spending all of our budget. Because we're gonna take a bunch out of our fund balance.
Yeah.
There's no place to hire anyone. There's no money to hire. So unless we either have some dramatic reduction in costs somewhere, or a dramatic increase in revenue somewhere, it's not that we're trying to stay at 50. It's that that's what we can afford, is right around 40, high 40s to 50. Because we are using all of our budget. It's not like we're piling in over the next few years, millions of dollars into fund balance. We're taking it out. We've been saving it up, knowing this was coming, and now we're gonna take it out.
and we do a lot of creative things that keep our costs down, that I think add up, that are small. Like, our payment in lieu is very high, it's 50%, but we have very, I think less than 50% of our employees take insurance, which lowers our cost. So we do things like that are strategic. Part-time folks, the reason we're investing in benefits is when we meet with them and they say stay interviews, we have highly educated part-time folks doing work that they could do at a much higher level at full-time, but when they come to us and say, can I just have some bereavement leave? Can I have some sick leave? We're like, yeah, let's do that, because we wanna keep you, it doesn't require us to have a full-time person, and we have really good people. So we're trying to get really creative, but we're also trying to figure out where that standard of service is, and how can we meet it with what we have? And so my job and our team's job is to be as direct with you guys as possible and saying, if that's your standard of service, this is what it's gonna cost. And right now, this is what we can provide based on the costs we have.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
with the trends, right, community service, customer service has just been increasing with what people are wanting. So like, that's gonna continue to climb, we're gonna continue, I am very happy to see, the creativity in hiring, lawn mowing services. But again, that's a direct result, right?
Yeah.
Because of the challenges, and so it's like, is this sustainable? I understand the math, I understand the metrics of keeping us at 50, I understand the challenge of going over that. But as someone who's been sitting here for 8 meetings now, and we've had a good chunk of the past 4 budgets, where this has been a concern is sustainability, so it's like, here we are again saying, no, we're not gonna raise it, but we are acknowledging that the need. So that's why I'm asking, because of course we don't know the future, but it's just becoming a point of how much is too much on staff. And I appreciate the more creativity, but these are
But
just,
I'm
it's a lot.
But are you saying that?
Am I saying what?
Are you saying you don't have enough people to do the work?
No,
I am saying.
Are you even hinting at that? Have you done it the last 3 or 4 years?
Well, no, I wanna say this, that where we have had gaps in the past is in capital investment. We're starting to really be consistent on capital investment. And I think one of the concerns I have, as we start to look at the trends in operation costs, is I do not want to get to year 3 from now and say, we did all this work on asset management, we did all this work to outline the next 25 years of streets, but you know what, we don't have the money to invest in them. That's what I'm nervous about, that's what I see coming, is that in the past, the way that we've dealt with decreases is let's not do capital. And then we get really behind the 8 ball, and I feel like we've really spent the last 5 years getting on track. And so that would be the cautious tale I would have for you guys, is that if we start to get there, we don't have room and staff, to your point, we're running really efficiently with staff. But don't start cutting capital when we get there, because then we fall so behind, we gotta figure out another solution. And costs are going up, but I really am excited about figuring out what we really need. And my fear is we start to do the utility asset management in particular, it's gonna show that we have a lot more investing to do in utilities than we've been. Because there's just the age of the system, the things we need to be doing with regular maintenance, that we just, the plant, we took care of, but now we gotta figure out all the other stuff. And I see that these asset management plans are gonna start driving some more need for capital. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
But I will say that we're also, Elizabeth and I had a one-on-one today where we were talking about, how do we start getting more things online with automatic infills to increase reviews, using AI, doing all those things, because even with the staff we have, if we maintain it, the needs are growing, so we gotta figure out where we free up space. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is just kind of the summary on the personnel costs. So this is what I was talking about with the wages when the police officers signed their contract. The 11% increase, but it was 9 to 15 depending on where they fell. To address comps, non-union requests, like the mayor mentioned, we do get requests of, I'm not matching up to the job reach outs that I'm getting. How do we stay competitive with that? And if you can make a strong case that our job from a market perspective is falling behind, we do merit increases and things like that. Leadership growth, really, I know you look at, this picture here, I'm very proud of, Jeff and Kirk in the back, because these are all internal promotions. And people that have grown through the organization and have built their skills, and now are managers, supervisors, and that's the kind of stuff that I think shows us that we're having success, and that we gotta keep investing in that. And being comfortable with saying, hey, our work towards this is, you get into this position, but we still want you to be investing in yourself in the following ways. And when you get up to that, you're gonna get another bump, because it's an incentive to keep investing in yourself. The union growth plans, you'll see these levels, and I know something new that's coming is the fire department is gonna be proposing a levels system as well. And so that will be in the next budget to really give incentive to those that are investing and training and all of those things. Part-time growth plan, I mentioned, that has 3 levels where somebody comes in as a qualified, becomes a specialist, and the goal is to really get them feeling that they can invest in themselves. And I can tell you, one employee in particular has really taken advantage of that and has probably provided us some succession planning that we didn't even know we needed from a clerk's perspective. You can imagine if we didn't have a deputy clerk trained, if the next election or during these early voting days where there's so much more hours, we have somebody that can step in and actually run that election even for a day. Any questions on that? So when we look at the general fund, there's not a lot of changes. When you look through line by line, you're gonna see that if there's a big decrease in the line item, it's probably because we did capital the year before. And you can probably tee that in, and if you have questions, we're happy to answer those individuals. If you're seeing an increase, it's because we're doing capital. That's what you're gonna see in those big changes. Otherwise, there's just some standard growth in operating costs. We didn't do anything really big changing, flashy. There might be some contract services added, to your point of where can we offset staff time. But generally, it's a pretty standard budget with just minimal increases. Michelle and I went back and forth about going department by department, but there's really not a lot to talk about because it's pretty standard increases. This is the capital and general fund. We're talking about customer service renovation, and we're talking about community development. These are the items that are under that purview, that a lot of them come out of once zoning is complete, we will shift into these action items. These are things that we wanted to note that are not. When you look at the parking and grounds mowing, that's where we're estimating about 130,000. General fund increase, we are adding an additional increase this budget of 50,000 because we're gonna be short when we get to the fire expenditures. We'll see that when you see the fire fund. So this is gonna just build up some additional revenue in there. And then things that are not in the budget but will likely end up in the budget that we wanted to be transparent about is storm expenses. So storm expenses are in there. You guys have allocated that they could be used as an emergency expenditure. We have requested from the Michigan State Police a grant for, $242,000. We think we'll at least get a portion of that, probably a significant portion of that, but we didn't put it in the budget because we're not sure. And so we're actually submitting our application, this week, and so we'll know more in the next month or two. Library, we have about $150,000 left in the work to complete the project. When we say complete the project, that would include, the windows, the cupola, and things like that. The interior is done, our investment in that. There's some other work exterior, and if you remember, you guys approved a window, grant submission. The windows is 100,000 of that. So, or the grant is 100,000 of that. So if we got that grant, there would be 50,000 remaining. So we're working with the library. They're doing a lot of fundraisers, if you haven't heard, to try to raise money. Yeah. So they were all downtown trying to recruit people this last weekend. But so we think we're close to that finish line when it comes to completing that project. But we don't have it in there, but you would see what we would envision is that any increase would be matched by revenue. So we're continuing to work on that.
Deb, before you go back on that,
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know, I'm not opposed to this contract of the mowing. You've got an estimate there of 130,000. Is that more or less than what we would have paid part-time employees? Where's that fit in? Is that a cost savings, or is it gonna cost us more?
I'm gonna start talking, but I'm gonna turn it over to you in a minute. But I think what's hard to quantify is if you do part-time hours directly, no, it's not a cost savings. But our challenge is it's more holistic than that, because you have supervisory time, you have training time, you have all of these things. You have overtime that staff was having to do when seasonal wasn't there, so figuring out that balance. But I think it ended up a little bit higher, but it wasn't significantly. Is that true, Kirk, or where we?
That's correct, yep. And there was some costs that we just couldn't show. Our payroll increases a lot for our payroll person in finance that has to sit there and go through 12 different timesheets because we're adding 12 timesheets every payroll. For the human resource, sending out physical, drug screening, background checks, all that has to be done, and you're turning over these part-timers quick. It adds up a lot of time there that you can't capture the cost. But as far as the salaries, I forget exactly what we were, had budgeted. I don't know if Michelle remembers what it was.
It's like it's about 40,000 when she added.
I did the 2,600 hours times just nominal $15, I was like 39K.
Yeah, then you had to add a little bit extra.
But that wouldn't include
But I don't know.
rentals.
Yeah.
Equipment rental.
And someone might get $12 and $18. but-
Yeah, so the wages alone, no. But if you look at the holistic cost, we weren't that far off, and we didn't account for everything. It's just hard because a lot of those are not direct, you know, and it's a lot of time, but we don't know really. I mean, we ended the last season, and I know it won't be every season like that, but I mean, I think we had 3 on workers' comp by the end of the season, so that was all being covered by full-time folks. And so just even having that kind of in the full benefit package of our employees when, to be honest, they're really skilled and can do the leaded service lines in a really efficient way where mowing is a little bit easier for us to contract. Does that make sense?
I get it.
Yeah.
The other question I guess I should have asked earlier on is when you talk about the cost savings for insurance for those employees that don't take it.
Yeah.
What, because I know that we pay them to not take it.
Right.
What
We pay them half the premium that we would pay.
half?
Yes. So they're paid a payment in lieu, half of what we would have paid full if they took our insurance. And I can tell you, it's competitive. If your spouse is employed, almost everyone that has a spouse that has health insurance takes their spouse's health insurance.
Is that bad?
No, but the payment in lieu, I mean, I can tell you, it's nowhere near what my husband's is. You know, and it encourages it, and I can tell you that other cities that have tried to stay at a lower rate, it doesn't give this incentive that we want it to, right? So it's trying to figure out the challenges. I think our employees, I don't wanna say it's all payment in lieu. If your spouse works for an employer that's larger, you probably have more options on insurance too, that we just can't provide. You know,
The increase for fire equipment fund for $50,000, that being offset by any increase in charges for townships that we service?
Why don't we wait till we get stuff?
I'm sorry?
Oh, we do cover fire contracts here. The contracts are expected, they'll be negotiated this year. I mean, you just approved Aladdin, Delhi one this winter. The other two contracts will be up in July. I would expect that we're gonna do a CPI increase. I wouldn't expect more.
Why?
Because just because we need equipment doesn't mean that the equipment to service them is required.
But it's still cheaper than them buying equipment.
I think it is. I mean, there's no doubt about it that contracting with us is going to be cheaper than them providing their own fire service all day long. That's reality. But that's not the only reason we contract. We contract for a holistic types of reasons. We contract because, I don't know, I mean, Carrie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but when you look at the amount of structure fires we have within the city, there's not a ton. And regular fires that we have. And so to keep a paid on call department trained, active, and all those things, they have to be regularly responding. We hear that over and over again. And so if we stop contracting, we're not gonna be having that experience built. We're not gonna have the retention of firefighters. And so equipment, amount of responses, number of calls are all big indicators on how you sustain a paid on call department.
I understand it, but it's still cheaper for them to contract with us. And why don't we pass that cost on to them?
Because they're under the same constraints we are. I mean, and when we get there, I mean, we're looking at the numbers. I know Carrie is running them to determine if we're in line with where our full contract cost was and with how many calls we responded to, because they don't have a it's a lump sum contract. So we'll be evaluating whether we felt like we were in line or not. But part of a partnership with these townships is to be fair with them of what our costs are versus what theirs are and try to figure out where the common ground is. And I can tell you that they haven't been happy that the contract has consumer price index and not tracked on what the inflation cap is for the state. Because they basically say we're increasing beyond what they can cover in their millage. And we've been pushing that our equipment costs and things like that are still going up higher. I don't remember, what was our last, do you remember in July what the increase was?
It was a lot.
So,
The year before.
So I mean, they're getting significant increases because they're not being capped at the state. They're being targeted at the actual consumer price index. So I think our costs are keeping up overall. But I mean, we look at it before we bring the contract, we'll be able to justify why we're making the recommendation we're making.
Okay.
But the fire equipment fund and the shift that we've made is not about necessarily fully funding our equipment. It's about having a portion of that contract go towards equipment, not all of it. It's not a dollar for dollar.
Yeah, so last year was 9%, this year's 3%.
Why did it drop?
That follows the CPI for, so it's the consumer price index for urban communities. So, and we do it from June to prior year June, so we set it right from the state, and it's in their contract too, so it's the US Census Bureau is where I get the percentage from.
Oh, if it's the CPIs, we just talked about the CPI being 5%.
No, that's not the CPI. The inflation cap for the state property taxes is set by the state because of the property tax cap. You can't go higher than 5.
Then explain to me why it was 9 last year and 3 this year. I mean, what,
These are
What is-
different numbers,
okay,
different calculations, completely different. This is a federal number. The property tax is a state number. And there's a cap on the state number. You can't go
So
higher than 5. So on this one, we are using, I thought it was it's been high too. Is it the 2 years before? Because they were not happy with
The
the,
CPI right now is 3% or just
Yeah.
over, and the CPI 2 years ago was 10.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's about,
yeah.
but she's not talking about CPI.
Yes, she is.
CPI is state, and you just said.
No,
CPI is state.
CPI is federal. CPI is federal,
Bureau of Labor Statistics.
yeah. DPI is not a state number.
Okay, so, okay,
Yeah, the state has their own goofy calculation for property taxes that they somehow arrive at some inflationary number that they get, but it's.
So I wouldn't be surprised if when we're negotiating with the townships that they say to us, we want it to be capped on what the property tax cap is, not on CPI. And that's something we'll have to talk about, you know? I don't know that I feel strongly one way or the other right now. It's something we have to evaluate what that looks like.
I do. Or we could just make it 5% all.
Well, I can tell you right now, you look at a 3%, we would get more from the state cap than that. So
Mhm.
I know it's an evaluation of what makes most sense, of what we're actually basing our expenditures on,
well, it makes most sense is sharing the cost with the townships, that's what makes the most sense.
which we're doing.
At a higher
So-
rate.
So you, I'm trying to remember in the budget, I didn't see the detail under the fire department, but the fire department budget, the line item budget doesn't really go into incredible detail, but. And it certainly doesn't break down how the calculation is made to get the standby fees for the townships. But just to kind of clarify all this 50,000 is contemplated in that. I mean, we have a budget for the fire department of $600,000. And we have a formula that, the chief goes through to develop how much the township, each township, because they're all different, should pay us. And that money goes just into the pile of money that is used to fund the fire department. And then that is part of the revenue that funds this 50, but the vast majority of the fire department's budget is just general fund
Exactly.
taxes. The vast majority, probably 2/3-ish, or at least half.
You know, Michelle?
Service to the city.
Probably about half. Cause you're probably about a little over 300,000 in standby fees, or is it more than that?
What, you're shaking your head, Carrie. What is your estimate on where we are? A third.
So the city taxes are? Townships are about a third, so the majority, the vast majority
Yeah.
is city taxes, so. That's,
Well, and to be clear, you know, if you look at the history of how equipment has been purchased, it's been a large general fund contribution, and so we're trying to find a way to even that out,
well, I'm more curious, why are we behind?
because the cost.
Cost of the trucks went way up.
Yeah, considerably.
Folks are buying the trucks for the 20 years.
Can you say that louder, Carrie? What did you?
There's been a 60% increase in 3 years, fire just got these numbers.
I was scared of the numbers 2 years ago.
So, I mean, that's something that, you know, as we look at the fees, we have to evaluate, but there's also a balance of, I want to be clear, we're not the only one pitching to townships. I just want to be clear. In fact, there have been pitches in the last year to those townships. And so it is, an area that we have to be reasonable with where we are, because we do have other townships that will undercut us. And we have to figure out, and if we don't have that revenue, you're talking about a third of our budget, that still is our cost. So we gotta figure out how to fill that, and that's why these contract partnerships really help sustain us. Any other questions on that? Go ahead. You need
I
to-
have a question, I really need to go.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
apologize, I'll watch the rest
You
on.
gotta leave,
Yeah, I gotta.
good luck, John,
Good luck, John.
Take care.
Drive careful.
Oh, yeah.
drive fast, take chances.
You have to,
Always.
no, you have to.
Yeah, that's right, be aggressive.
I'll see the rest.
Thank you, drive safe.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so now let's get into special revenue funds, so major and local street funds. So this gives you that breakdown. A lot of these things are tied into, the capital projects we're doing. We did get a $250,000, just under $250,000 category B grant, for our street work for this summer. So that will help offset some of those costs, but we constantly are trying to, apply for grants and things like that, but those are getting more and more competitive. Any questions on major and local streets? So just as we're talking about the challenges, when you start moving stuff around, for example, when we look at our capital and you see like a list of projects, when we look at streets, we have to have Michelle over here doing the finessing of, is this a major street? Is this a local street? Where do we have funds? Where do we not have funds? Is this gonna be a more general fund contribution? Do we have utilities under this street? How much utilities? Can we do 2 streets with utilities in the same year? So the CIP really is meant to try to even us out and not have these big dips. And so when you see streets getting moved or you see things changing in the next couple of years, it's probably because we're gonna know more about the utility work that needs to be done and how that's gonna impact costs, or how it fits with where we are with major and local streets fund balance. And so just know that all of those are equations we're putting together.
Yeah, just one quick question. You're talking about future spending on wastewater projects. When they do a street, do they replace the storm? I know they replace the storm
Not always.
and the water, but do they also replace the sewer?
It depends on the street. Every street is evaluated. It doesn't, it's not an always on any of those.
If it's needed, though, we generally try to, actually,
Including the sewer?
Yeah.
all the underground, the
Yeah.
water line, the water mains, the sewer, the storm,
But those projects are the ones that freak out Michelle.
I just don't want to put in a new street and have to go back 5 years later and rip it up.
Well, it's a constant give and take
Oh, I
and
understand.
balance of, can you get 5 more years out of it? Because honestly, sometimes,
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, I've seen streets put in and they forgot to put in the water, or 2 years later, they decided to put in sewer, so they went and ripped it, brand new street up again and did it again, so I'm just curious as to.
I would just caution you that it's never that simple. It's never that simple because we look at, I look at Barnes and I cringe at whoever had to go in, do you know what I'm talking about, where they had to cut into the street and I'm like,
but I guess, and there's people in this room that, we have not, to my knowledge, had to do that in an extremely long time. What we've got is water main breaks,
yes,
or lead service line.
Yeah.
That's the kind of, but we can't foresee that. We fix the lead service lines when we do a road, right?
right.
When we do a road, that is a priority.
Yeah.
If we're gonna tear it up, we check those. But we, to my knowledge, the biggest violator we ever had was Consumers Energy. After we did Maple Street over here, they drove it here the next year and chopped a whole bunch of 8x8 holes in it. But
And we're
the
trying to
city's-
do better with that.
The city's been really good on that. We've never had to do a major thing. It's just been repairs.
So Parks, Trailways and Pathway Fund, so this, right now has the Cahill Riverwalk Trail and Lee Austin Park. If you remember, we made that switch at the CIP to shift up Lee Austin. I did get, an update, actually this last week, at the Ingham County Trail Millage has overspent their remaining balance. And so, they have already teed up projects that they had committed to, you only get money if the millage gets renewed. And so they're pretty spread out. And what's happening is they noted that Lansing, Meridian, some of those large projects are coming in close to $1 million over budget. And so it's, do you do it or do you not? And right now, apparently the park commission is moving forward with doing those and it's pushed back other projects. And so I just, I was hoping maybe we could get some money from Lee Austin. I'm not sure we're gonna be able to because of their overcommitment right now. Rainer Bond Fund, this is, yeah, go ahead.
Austin Park, do we have the agreements in place with the railroad and Consumers Energy?
Nope, not yet, because we gotta get through our budget process before we can move forward, and we gotta get through design. That project's not gonna be done or started until next spring.
But we're not gonna proceed without them.
We can't.
Can't build on their property without agreements, correct, yeah. Rainer Bond Fund, not a lot is happening there, it's just maintaining.
Is there a reason why you don't show the fund balance going on, or the cash on hand balance going out like you do on the other, or is it? I just
We only
curious
show
why
the,
those are blank.
I think only show the current year.
That's
cash up.
your custom?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. You show the fund balances, but not the cash, okay.
Building inspection fund, and this is one where we track, they have to be used for a specific purpose, and we have to cover our costs. The American Rescue Act fund, this is just to track that grant, which will be closed out at the end of this year. Tax and grant financing funds, we have the DDA, who has quite a bit of capital plans. So they have some projects going on, they invested in the library, they set aside some money for facade and things like that, so they're starting to get down on their fund balance, in a good way. They're starting to use that money into capital. They're looking at a contribution to the Lee Austin Park. And that's all planned within their, current funding.
I'm just curious, why isn't the Lee Austin Park capital included up there?
It is.
I mean, like a little box, like you've got downtown wayfinding as a capital project for DDA.
You know, I think it's because we added it late, that it probably didn't make it in there. Sorry. It should be in there.
That's fine.
Or you know what? It's because it's a contribution. That's why.
What's the,
I was gonna say,
Oh,
Michelle would catch that.
Cause we're doing the capital in the parks plan.
So-
It's actually capital project in the parks. plan.
Got it.
Oh, and your slide's
So-
different than our book.
Okay.
Our book doesn't have that little box.
Yeah, so this, they're just gonna, basically like, the library, they contributed money,
Yep.
but the project doesn't.
But it's not their project.
Right.
Yep.
I knew you would have caught that if I was.
Well, I've gotta be honest with you, it should be somewhere, and I don't see it anywhere.
It
I mean,
is. It
it
is.
should be somebody, it should be something somewhere, capital from DDA.
It is right here. This is where the revenue is coming in.
But that doesn't say, the DDA is not giving 300,000.
They're committing, that's what that additional revenue is up there.
I guess
No,
what
additional revenue includes contribution from the GDA.
Yeah, whatever you wanna do, but if we're gonna use the CIP, then let's use it. Where's the CIP line item for that?
It is.
Or is it, or you're saying it's buried in the Lee Austin Park side?
It
So the
is, it's
DDA,
the same project.
the DDA does not have a CIP line for this. Lee Austin does, and we're just contributing to
Yes,
the DDA.
yes, yes, yeah.
Got it.
Okay, so we talked about DDA, LDFA, they're just the regular commitment to the wastewater treatment plant. I can't say enough about the LDFA in that if we did not have the LDFA, we would be in a completely different spot on rate increases on utilities. And so, it was a lot of good forethought by the people that set up that TIF to allow for it to include the wastewater treatment plant. Water and sewer fund,
Deb, can I ask, why do we anticipate the tax revenue from the LDFA to go down?
is that?
I'm
that was
curious,
part of-
is there a,
Is that part of the personal
Part
property?
of the, it's that.
the personal property
Yeah.
dropping off or
Property,
something?
yeah,
Okay.
based on that.
Needed to build buildings.
Water and sewer fund.
They need-
So this, revenue includes an expected increase of 5% in July based on the Baker Tilly, study. That will be something that, next year we'll probably have to evaluate a little more closely based on the cost, but right now we're only recommending the 5% that's in the Baker Tilly study. You have a question?
no, just use the words. I'm not criticizing you, I'm just the way you said it.
What did
We're
I say?
only gonna raise it 5%, that's based on next year.
Well, that's the projection, was 5%, and our usage has gone down and our costs have increased, so I think maintaining that 5% is conservative. So these are the water and sewer fund activities that are planned. And you'll see here that there's a mix of utility work in streets, but also some of that, what I would consider asset management and really looking at some of the things we need to do in different areas. We are having a lot of success with the raising of the manholes and the impact of the wastewater treatment plant. We're actually getting some good data on that. And so that's a really good investment that we want to continue, and Eagle really wants us to continue doing that, to help us with our monitoring. And I think we are pretty comfortable now that it would not require an equalization tank, at the new site. So that's a huge cost savings, of what we thought might be required in the future. So this gives the breakdown of rate trends. And so when you look at here, this is that 5% increase. The structural change was difficult to do an increase percentage on, because that's when we moved to ready to serve. And so this gives you the breakdown between them. I think some of those are gonna change even more in the next year, because I know a lot of them have capital projects that are pretty large. But we'll see how that flushes out. So building and maintenance fund, this will be created to handle the construction of the DPW. So this will be based on the payments that will be made towards that construction project. And tracking that as we go to pay off that. And then the motor vehicle pool, these are the equipment that are planned to be purchased in the next year. These are all things that were in the CIP, there's no changes from that. Them in the cemetery trust fund, this just is a maintained fund, and I wanna be clear that these aren't, this isn't where we're getting the majority of our revenue to cover the cost of maintaining the cemetery. That's separate, that's coming from the general fund, so this is mainly, that long-term maintenance.
So is the revenue coming from perpetual care?
Mhm. For this fund.
Mhm.
Yeah. Economic Development Corporation, this fund will be closed at the end of 23-24. We closed that out. Capital Improvement Fund, this will be used for the construction of the new DP Department of Public Works. So can you talk a little bit about those two breakdowns, that property maintenance fund and this, so the original, you want us through that
Yeah,
too?
so the 631 fund, which is the new building and maintenance fund for DPW, that's where like everyday operations will go. The capital improvement fund is just where we're gonna use to actually build it. So then once built, that fund would be done.
But the other fund will be the rents
Yeah.
to pay back.
Yeah. So all the operational of the DPW will be like a motor vehicle equipment where you'll charge rent to the users of it, and then they will.
Just water and sewer are using it, DPW is using
Yeah.
it, if the
So
school
general
isn't gonna
fund,
use it, I
right.
mean,
Potentially.
the fire
general
department
fund,
uses
yeah.
it,
So streets would contribute,
Streets
we're
would
gonna have, yeah.
So this is the fire equipment fund that we were talking about, and this is what we're saying is even if you look at the 150, you're looking at a significant contribution needed in that year that would come from general funds to cover that cost. And so this would mean that maybe other capital has to be shifted in order to buy a truck that year.
Carrie, are you saying it's more than 900?
I just got this at 315, 975,000.
Goes up every minute.
They want 20% of your last 3 years.
you know what that's attributed to, Chief?
One of the big estimated increases is the new emissions standard that's coming in effect.
The engines are outrageously expensive.
So the Basin Building Authority, this will be where we obtain the debt, so there's a lot of financing things we have to do to track some different things. And so the Building Authority, which hasn't, I think, I'm on that board and I have not met since I've been here. So that is something that we put into place when we need to do a project, so that's in there. And we will need to actually issue the debt. Special assessments, this is where we're tracking those ongoing assessments or payments for costs that we have. Do you want to add anything to that, Michelle, on special assessments?
Nope, not at this time.
Is that a fund balance or is that a cash balance?
That's a cash balance.
Why is there such a huge cash balance in special assessments?
So that's a project for us, we need to go back because there's years where none of that money was moved to the fund it belonged in. So some of that money goes to water sewer, some of it goes to general fund, so we're working through the past years.
Sort out what.
What belongs where.
Yeah, okay.
Why is it decreasing? Is Kearns Road dropping off that or something, or collecting less on it?
Well, most
Because
of
we
the,
just instituted a new.
yeah, most of the recent three, projects, well, most of the projects we've done recently have been 3 years, so every year you have one fall off. So it just depends on what project was what year, if it was higher, obviously, it's still. Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So we have come to the end. Do you guys have any questions on fund detail? Hearing none?
What,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just, I understand what you said about the fund balances, so. The outstanding debt we have for this building. And. What was the other one?
Water,
The water treatment.
Yeah, the water treatment plant. What do we? I know what you said our annual payments are. What percentage of that is interest?
it's in there.
This.
Yeah. And I guess I was getting at,
It's page 4 in the
Yeah, if you
highlight.
look at page 4, it has the breakdown.
Under what?
Highlight.
Page 4, highlight.
And the percentages are on the page before that, page 3. So city hall ranges from 3 to 4% for interest. And then the water treatment plan is a 2.125.
so is there, would there be any significant savings and with the large percentage of the fund balance that we have paying those off?
No, because then we wouldn't be able to do capital next year.
Yeah.
We need that fund balance to address next year. And so,
Well, can you pay off that bond?
Some of it.
some of it you can, some of it you can't. I know, like, you know, we talked about on the DPW, that will be structured where you can't pay it off, there's gonna be a timeline you have to go through the payments. But honestly, those items that are financed are helping us even out costs. And if we were to pay those, and I'm with you on equipment, like, I'm a huge advocate for if we can pay for our fire truck in cash and do those things, we should. But some of these facility projects, I think it helps us to keep investing. Otherwise, you fall behind because you're making that contribution and then now you can't
Because we
do.
could loan ourselves the money to pay it off and then charge ourselves with interest to pay it back, or 1% interest as opposed to 2 or whatever, to pay it back, and we can still be ahead of the game, but I understand what you're saying.
I'm not sure you can do all that, but
You can, but it's gonna impact your operating budget,
Yeah.
because now you gotta make a loan payment, even though you're making it to yourself, you're transferring money.
We've done it.
right, but I don't know that the benefit is outweighing because you're just.
3-4% is pretty cheap money. I know it's not cheap by municipal standards necessarily, but that was on a building project that, you
So
know,
right now it is because they're estimating.
Now it'd be-
DPW at like 5.
yeah, it'd be much higher now. So we're doing well. I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I was just curious.
But you got, I guess I didn't know, how much longer before City Hall's paid off? What,
24.
24 years, 16 years, okay.
Well, the water bond is
16
28.
2028.
Let's see the, like she says, eating out, you know what it is. Yeah.
I get that.
Dump it in, like,
Yeah. So
if you buy that $960,000 fire truck, can you sell it 2 months later for like $1.5 million or something?
We could speculate, and buy one.
No, no.
That's great money.
No. Look at that.
It just occurred to me, I mean, they're going up that fast, you ought to be able to get a decision.
Hey Deb, this budget, there wasn't social trends or prices, calls and whatever.
Yeah, we didn't track that, in this budget, but I can get that comparable number that we presented last year. If there are no other questions, please let us know if you found something that need a clarification on, or if it's something that would help you make the decision on, the May 6th meeting. We will try to get that to you before then. But otherwise, we're considering this the budget as presented. And that your next meeting would be where you would determine whether you wanna, one, after hearing the public hearing, move forward, adopt, and then vote for it. Thank you for taking the time today, and thank you for meeting earlier.
Good job.